you see, to me, Milford is unique. It may not look that way to anyone else, but we, each of us, we think we're unique, don't we? And you think you're who you are, and I think I'm who I am, and I feel that way about my hometown of Milford. And there's no place on earth like Milford. And never will be, and never has been before. It wasn't just the water that made it special, but the Huron River Valley has always had good water power, and plenty of oak and hickory, some maple, some beech, even some wild plum and cherry. Elijah Ruggles and his family were about the first to settle down in the Milford area. It was 1831. And the house they lived in, the first in the village, was built of logs. And more settlers poured in during the 1830s and 40s. There was Amos Meade and Levi Pettibone and Jonathan Kersley. And Frederick Pryor came in 1835. And from Detroit, some of them walked to Milford on foot, something that would be close to impossible today. When I look back on their life and the ups and downs and all the hardships, well, our grandparents, they were in the prime of life when they came to Milford. And I'll bet if they'd known what it was to be pioneers in a new country, they might never have had the courage to come. But with all the disadvantages of raising a family in a new country, there's consolation in knowing that your children are prepared for whatever lies ahead. Far better, I think, than if they had never left the East. In spite of difficulties, others followed. The John Stevens family came up Old Grand River from Detroit, and Milford grew as a market for all the surrounding farms. Ansley Arms opened a dry goods store. Abe Seaman started a shoe shop. And you could get almost anything at Bennett's drugstore. Farmers could sell their surplus in Detroit, but that was more than 30 miles away and a week's trip by horse and buggy. You had to plan on that. No matter how or where they sold their crops, it wasn't easy. I can remember one old-timer's story.
My grandfather bought this acre of land and got drunk one time. His horses ran away with him, threw him out of the cart, broke both legs, and he died of gangrene. So I guess my grandmother had a pretty rough time bringing up those kids in those days. I don't think we realized the worries and fears of a parent in those pioneer days, but I don't remember ever going to bed hungry. My father used to dress deerskins and make them into mittens and gloves and whiplashes, and he went to Farmington and sold what he could, and then he went to Pontiac, sold the rest of them. Bought a few groceries and came home. All this done in one day, walking all the distance and carrying his load on his back.
Seems like Milford always had a mill. There was the Ruggles sawmill, and Jacob Peters' grist mill, and a woolen mill. Nearly all these mills and factories depended on the water power available. The Huron River was almost like a magnet, the way it attracted so many businesses. Within a few years, as the settlers kept coming, the village began to take shape. South Milford grew first. There was quite a division between the north and south of town that you could even notice on folks' church attendance. When the Presbyterian church was moved to the north side, some folks sat on the south side of the church. Can you believe that? But they were good people, and the faith of Milford was seen in folks like John Maloney. He cut most of the stones for St. Mary's, and they built it from scratch. It was really the river and mills along its shores that gave Milford its life. Phil Wells and Orville Lamphere created more water power just by digging at the head of the Hogsback and letting the water through, and they made the upper and lower Moore's Lake. That's the way they did things, just did 'em. Every time I think about the early days of Milford, I think about the farmers. Milford's always been a farming town, and I think farmers are the last geniuses. Maybe that's why most people consider themselves farmers at heart. Farmers have to be able to keep a $10,000 piece of machinery working with a piece of baling wire and an off-size bolt and the lid from an old tin can. And they have to be gamblers, predicting the weather and when to harvest their crops. And farmers have got to be the world's greatest optimists. Like my dad always said, the ladder of life is full of splinters, but they always hurt the worst when we're sliding down, so keep climbing up. Yep, those farmers were geniuses, and there were quite a few around the Milford area. I can remember one in particular. He had quite a story.
I never got very far away from here. I tried farming for 8 years. That was a fizzle. And plagued with tough luck. I've lost horses, and I've lost cattle, cows. I thought the devil was after me. One fall we had blight all through here on the potatoes. God never made the day long enough for a farmer. You had to get up in the morning at 5 o'clock and get in the field by 7. I'd quit at 5:30, be in at 6 for supper. Then, after supper, go to the barn and milk and take it up and run it through the separator. It's funny how things work out. I sold out and went to work in the mill. Worked 3 days. Fellows sold out. Then I didn't have a job. Came home that night and said to the wife, "That was a short job." She says, "Yeah." She says, "What are we going to do now?" I said, "I'm going to find another job, that's all." She says, "There's 6 of us to feed." And I says, "I realize it."
With the railroad coming through in the 1870s, I think it was the Flint and Pierre Marquette, selling our crops came easy, and Milford really sprouted. Hotels, stores, saloons. There was a lot of building that took place in the 70s and 80s, and Milford had about every kind of business you could imagine. Some succeeded, some failed. But Milford had 'em all at one time or another, and I think the railroad helped some of it. A lot of local men got to work on the railroad. I can recall one of them telling me.
We worked 10 hours a day, lifting track, putting in ties, general service. When I started, the pay was 13 cents an hour. One time, I went and got my paycheck. Paid all the bills. Wife said, how much you got left? I had just 15 cents. I threw it on the table. I said, that's it. She said, don't you get discouraged? Discouraged, yeah, but you just gotta keep on going.
Those were simpler and more peaceful times by today's standards. They were the happy sort of carefree days of the final years of the last century, before the telephone, automobiles, movies, and naturally before television, when the small-town band was sort of the cultural center of most rural communities like Milford, Michigan. I liked those days. I don't see anything wrong in calling them the good old days, but there were many illnesses. For instance, there was scarlet fever, and then smallpox and diseases like that. And there were tragedies, train wrecks from time to time. We had several fires that caused great damage. When Holmes' livery stable burned, 10 horses were lost, and we can't look back and think that that was very good. But for the most part, I think they were the good old days, because I believe there was an innocence that suits me better than today. Now, even though you were poor, there was no shame connected with it. You didn't have to have that new TV. You didn't have to have all those things. I don't know, but we were richer for that. And I can remember hurrying home from school as fast as I could go to go fishing down on the Huron River. As we grew older, my brother and I had a boat. We'd start at the cemetery bridge and row all the way down to Kent Lake. We went down to Foote's Grove for a lot of picnics. They had 3-legged races and all those old-fashioned things. We had an awful lot of fun. Seems like we did. Well, maybe we didn't, but I think we did. Families did things together. Living in Milford, we just had good times. And we had a baseball team, I can remember. Grover Blackman, Harry Wooten, and John Hanna. You bought your own bat and your own gloves, and the boys did their own coaching. One year, we played the Tigers at a homecoming and beat them. Yes, we did, the Detroit Tigers, and we trimmed them 13-5. Main Street was a dirt road. Along the edge of the sidewalks were hitching rails, ideal places to skin the cat, turn somersaults, or something for small fry. Just below this was a curbing of cobblestone, and it went out in the street for about 12 feet. But there are others who can recall Main Street better than I can.
One of my favorite places on Main Street was Gregory's Variety Store. Wonderful place for a small fella. Blanche McPherson worked there, and she was one of my first loves. Potts Groceries. Now, that was a sharp-looking building. Spent a lot of time fixing and repairing. And then there was S.L. McCall, Sam McCall's menswear. Next door was Mrs. Brown's millinery shop. Mrs. Harper and Mrs. Adams made and sold hats for Mrs. Brown. Crosby's Variety Shop, one of my favorite places. Rose Crosby baked peanuts, salted peanuts in her own roaster. Oh, my, 10 cents a pound. William Wilson's dry goods store, a big store. And Nina St. John's was the clerk here. I wonder if William didn't get tired of paying her because he married her, so she was Nina Wilson.
But Main Street was more than just the merchants. It was where a lot of our social life took place. I can remember we had an Oakland County Fair that was held here. It meant a lot to us. Used to be Chautauqua speakers come here. I don't recall who they were, the performers, but I thought it was great, and believe me, it was. A body could ramble on forever, but if you wonder why we think Milford was so unique, it was partly because we had some unique people. Like Bill Purdy and Charlie Price, now there was a craftsman. Charlie was a leather and harnessman. All his harnesses were handmade. He came to town from the farm in 1908, about the time Milford was having its growing pains, and the carriage trade was good. Not many folk thought that a gasoline buggy would replace the horse-drawn kind. You know, I think my dad bought a buggy harness from Charlie for $15. So Milford's been out front in a number of ways. Charlie Price was one of them. I guess it was people like these. Ones like Dr. Foote and Dr. Tom Jackson. So there you have it, my hometown, the way I remember it. So many good people, people that most others have forgotten. To me, Eliza Ruggles, the Burns, old T.J. McCurdy, the Rowe family, Mamie Arms, Boyles, and all the others. They're as much a part of Milford as anyone else. It's nice to come back to all of this. The idea that you can't go home again isn't true exactly. Why do I keep coming back? To get renewed, and to keep the inside of me going where it ought to go. It means a great deal to come back to a place where some man may have seen you when you were only just a few inches long. And this is where the very trees we walk under were planted by my grandfather. Those trees out there were planted by him. I'm sure there are trees planted in some other town in Wisconsin, and some lady could tell you the same thing. But to her, that town would be unique. And this, to me, It's why Milford is unique.
Little Joe Ribbleman had a huge black dog. And everybody knew the dog's name, but anytime they would meet Joe on Main Street, they'd say, "What's your dog's name, Joe?" And his name was Himby. And say, "Where did you ever get a name like Himby?" And say, "Himby damn good dog."
I remember also that the Lovejoy store had a drawing every week for the groceries. If you bought groceries at Lovejoy's, you saved the coupons or something, and that was all put in a pot. And each week there was a drawing, and somebody would win a clock. It was the same clock every week. I can remember what used to be what was the first, I think was the first automobile in Milford. Now, Eleanor Phillips thinks her father owned the first automobile, and I don't think so. I think Frank Orvis did up the street.